بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome to this 31st class of Islamic fiqh. Today we will talk about the three different rituals of Hajj. Is divided into three types for each pilgrim to choose from. The highest being tamattu', and the pilgrim is called mutamatti'. The second is qiran, and the pilgrim is called as qarin. And the last one is ifrad, and the pilgrim is called mufrid. So this is a bit confusing for those who do not understand it, and for those who may not have performed Hajj before, but I'll try my level best to explain it all to you. The main difference between tamattu' and the other two rituals, which are the ifrad and the qiran, is that tamattu' has a separate umrah performed during the months of Hajj than the Hajj itself. And how is that done? You remember that the 3 months of Hajj are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah. Majority of the tasks performed during the month of are performed during the month of the Hijjah, specifically in the 4 or 5 days, beginning of the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, and if you want, you can stay an extra day on the 13th. This is optional. So the vast majority of tasks performed by days. But the mutamatti' has an extra deed that he offers, which is a separate umrah done from day 1 of Shawwal, depending on when he comes. So one asks, then why does he perform umrah? A mutamatti' enjoys coming in earlier than others. And we all know that you're not entitled, which is a designated area for a person intending Umrah or Hajj, to wear the ihram in. So it is not permissible to pass without assuming the state of ihram. So imagine if you are a qarin or a mufrid and you come intending to do Hajj on the 1st Ramadan. So you pass by the miqat, you assume the state of ihram, and you go to Mecca. However, you are prohibited from doing any of the things prohibited in the state of ihram until the day of Eid, which is the month of Shawwal, the month of Dhul Qa'dah, and 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. 70 days you cannot trim your mustache, you cannot remove the hair of your own hair, clip your nails, wear perfume, have intimacy with the missus, wear normal clothes. 70 days. That's a lot. This is why the vast majority of Muslims who come to perform Hajj, they do not come when they come early. intending to do Qiran or Ifrad, because they're going to wait for so long time without being able to live and assume their normal lives. He performs Tawaf and Umrah, Tawaf and Sa'i for his Umrah. So both Tawaf and Sa'i are pillars because he's performing a separate Umrah, like any other Umrah. Assumes Ihram, performs Tawaf, performs Sa'i, and then cuts short his hair. Now he has exited the state of Ihram for completing the Umrah. So he's entitled to wear his normal clothes, have intimacy with the missus, wear perfume, and he stays living like a normal human being until the 8th of the Hijjah. So all this period, he's enjoying sitting in Mecca or the adjacent cities, going to Medina maybe, without any problem. And on the 8th of the Hijjah, he assumes Ihram for his Hajj. And this is done wherever he is, not from the miqat, because he has already entered the miqat Umrah. He was wearing his Ihram from the miqat. Now he's still within the miqat area. He doesn't need to wear Ihram again from the miqat. If he's in Mecca, he's in Mecca. If he's in Jeddah, he wears it from Jeddah. It doesn't matter. Why do we call him mutamatti'? Because tamattu' is to enjoy. And this person, as he had performed his Umrah, and now he is capable of wearing normal clothes and living a normal life without restricting anything which was restricted due to his Ihram, he's enjoying it. That's why he's called mutamatti'. On the 8th of the Hijjah, he assumes Ihram to become a muhrim, and he performs his Hajj. And we will take it onwards from there and describe the differences between the Hajj of all three rituals. So, what separates a mutamatti' from all the other rituals? Hajj, which are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and Dhul Hijjah. Now, let us look at Qiran and Ifrad. What's the difference between them? Qiran and Ifrad are identical in every step of the way. There is no difference, none whatsoever between them, except in two things. The first thing is the intention. By the way, Qiran means to combine in Arabic. So, qarana, something with something else. And most likely this is due because the horns of an animal, it's called qarn, and the plural is qurun, because they are together. And we call the marriage contract as aqdul qiran, because a man is joining or combining with a woman in marriage. So qarin, the man, the pilgrim, is called qarin because he's combining between two things. What are they? It is Umrah and Hajj. Oh, interesting. So he's like the mutamatti'. No, he's not like the mutamatti'. But I thought you said that the mutamatti' performs a separate Umrah. Then on the 8th of the Hijjah, he assumes Ihram and performs Hajj, like everybody else. Yes, this is exactly what I said. And now you're telling me that Qarin or Qiran is to combine Umrah and Hajj. So they're the same. No, they're not the same. And I'll explain to you why. He is called Qarin because though he performs Hajj rituals, as Umrah is embedded with his Hajj, though there is no separate Umrah in it. So this is a gift from Allah Azza wa Jal, that a person who performs Qiran is given the gift of one Umrah and one Hajj, though he did not make a separate Umrah at all. Question: then why our brother Mutamatti' did not do the same? Our brother Mutamatti' had a longer period to stay, so he wanted more. That's more rewardable than combining it with the Hajj itself. Interesting. What did the Prophet do, alayhi salatu wasalam? Which type of Hajj did he perform? The Prophet performed Qiran. So he did not perform a separate Umrah, rather he intended that his Hajj would include in it a Umrah. Okay, interesting. So you said earlier that there are two differences between intending to have an embedded Umrah within the Qiran Hajj. What is the second intention? What the second difference? The second difference is, due to this gift of embedded Umrah in a Hajj, and you get two for the price of one, you as a Qarin are obliged to slaughter a sheep as a form of sacrifice and expressing your gratitude to Allah, distributing the whole meat to the poor around the Haram area in Mecca. So that the Mufrid, the one who's performing Ifrad, is identical to the actions of the one who is performing Qiran, but the one doing Ifrad does not slaughter, correct. And he is not rewarded for a Umrah, correct. That's it. Interesting. So, I understand now that Tamattu' is performing a separate Umrah, cutting your hair short, wearing your normal clothes of Ihram on the 8th of the Hijjah. You do your rituals and you're done. So, are the three rituals identical on the 8th of the Hijjah onwards? Answer is no, they're not. Though they're similar, very much similar, but there is a slight difference that you have to pay attention to. Now, the Mutamatti' has done a tawaf and a sa'i separate for his Umrah, correct? Yes, correct. How did you know that it was a Umrah? Because he cut his hair afterwards. Good answer. Let's move to the 8th of the Hijjah, when everybody goes to Mina. Now, is there any difference? The answer is yes. Mutamatti' must not perform tawaf, must not perform sa'i when he goes to Mina or to Mecca on the Hijjah. He's obliged to perform tawaf al-Hajj and sa'i al-Hajj, and these are pillars. Got that? Understood. However, the person performing Qiran or Ifrad has the right to go directly to Mina, like the Mutamatti', and perform exactly everything he does every step of the way to Arafah, Muzdalifah, Mina, and then does the Tawaf al-Hajj and Sa'i al-Hajj. Clear? All three are identical. Now, the difference is that the one performing Qiran and the one performing Ifrad have an option that mutamatti' does not have. Interesting. So the mutamatti' had an option the other two did not have, which was after he assumed ihram, he cut short his hair and wore his normal clothes and sat in Mecca for a week, for a month, for two, depending when he came. So this was an advantage for him. The person doing Qiran or Ifrad are unable to do that. They cannot take their ihram except on the day of Eid. So now you're telling me that the person performing Qiran and Ifrad, they both have an option that the mutamatti' cannot have. True. What is that option? The option is following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which can only be performed by someone doing Ifrad and Qiran. And what is that? It is to come on the 8th or the 7th, up to you, of course you are in the state of ihram because you are performing Qiran or Ifrad. You make 7 rounds around the Kaaba. You mean tawaf? The answer is yes. And this tawaf is voluntary. It is like Tahiyyatul Masjid. It is known as Tawaful Qudum. Okay, so I perform 7 rounds while I'm in the state of ihram. Then what? Then you go to sa'i and you perform 7 rounds of sa'i, but this sa'i is not voluntary. This is a pillar of Hajj, which in normal cases it would have been performed on the day of Eid with the Tawaf of Hajj, as both Tawaf al-Hajj or Ifrad, that if you go to Mecca and you perform 7 rounds as voluntary Tawaf, you have the option to perform 7 runs between Safa and Marwa for your sa'i. So that on the day of Eid, you don't have to perform sa'i again. While our brother mutamatti', he's obliged to perform both tawaf and sa'i of al-Hajj on the day of Eid. Okay, now I understand, Sheikh. It's pretty easy. So the difference between Qarin and Mufrid is that on the 8th or the 7th of the Hijjah, they both go to Mecca and they perform Umrah and then they go and continue. No. Wait. I said they perform Tawaf al-Qudum and they precede, they bring forward Sa'i al-Hajj. Okay, this is Umrah, Tawaf and Sa'i. No, it's not Umrah. What do you mean it's not Umrah? You just said they perform Tawaf and Sa'i. This is Umrah. No, Akhi. Umrah is when you cut short your hair and wear your normal clothes afterwards. The Qarin and the Mufrid do not do that on the 8th day of the Hijjah. Rather, they stay in their ihram and go directly back to the camps in Mina. Okay, so the mutamatti', when he came a couple of months ago after Ramadan in Shawwal and he performed Tawaf and Sa'i, that was a Umrah because he cut short his hair or shaved his hair and wore his normal clothes. Bingo, that's correct. But the Qarin and the Mufrid on the 7th or the 8th day of the Hijjah, when they performed Tawaf, this was not a pillar because it's not a Umrah. This was voluntary. And the Hajj and the Sa'i after that is a pillar of the whole Hajj. Without it, the whole Hajj is invalid. And they did not cut their hair short because they were still in the state of ihram. Correct. Interesting. So these are the main differences between tamattu' and qiran and ifrad. A bit confusing, But if you master it, you will have no problem, none whatsoever, in understanding Hajj. So, Sheikh, what complies me? What forces me to perform any one of these three rituals? Nothing. Most people think of it in terms of financial obligation. So people who cannot come and stay in Mecca for a month or so say, I cannot go for tamattu. It is too expensive for me. So they opt for qiran or ifrad. And those who opt for ifrad say that I cannot slaughter a sheep. So I'd rather just do with Hajj. I don't need a Umrah. And this is up to the choice. The one in the between, which is Qiran, says no, I can afford. I can afford a sacrifice, and I'd like to be rewarded for a Umrah with minimal work, not like the Mutamattir. So I'm going to opt for this. And this is totally his decision to make, and there's no problem in that one, none whatsoever. So this is, in a nutshell, what Hajj is. Now we're going to follow the textbook, and we're going to point these things. With this introduction I had given you, inshallah, things would make sense to you. So, if we look at our books, how to conduct the pilgrimage. It says, the pilgrimage starts on the 8th of the Hijjah and ends at the sunset of the 13th. Before this, the pilgrim does the following. 1. So now he's talking about the 3 types of a pilgrim. What ritual is he picking? So number 1, a pilgrim choosing the tamattu'. A method starts his ihram or consecration at the point of miqat and declares a talbiyah, which is labbaik Allahumma labbaik labbaik la sharika laka labbaik innal hamda wan ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lak. So you find it and the translation as well. It says, on reaching Mecca, he performs the tawaf and the sa'i. He then shaves his head, which is preferable if he comes a month or so before Arafat, or he cuts short his hair if he comes earlier, if he comes few days before Arafat, because he's going to have to shave afterwards on the day of Eid. So if a person coming for Umrah a month or so before the day of Arafat, means that if he shaves, his hair would grow. But if you come a couple of days before Arafat, like you come on the 3rd of the Hijjah, and you perform your Umrah, it says he then releases himself from Ihram and wears his ordinary clothes. He then stays in Mecca or travels to nearby cities, providing he does not return to his hometown. Why did you say he does not return to his hometown? I don't understand. See, if I am from London and I come to Mecca for Umrah on the 2nd day of Shawwal, the first day is Eid of Ramadan, the 2nd day I fly from London to Mecca, perform my Umrah, stay there for a couple of days, and then return to London. When I assume the state of Ihram, again from London to Mecca, I would be initiating a second trip. If I'm initiate, means that I am not in the state of tamattu'. A person in the state of tamattu' who travels one journey from his home to perform 2 separate rituals. So a person let's assume from Cairo, Egypt, travels to Mecca, performs Umrah, and stays in Mecca. And when it is time for Hajj, he assumes Ihram and goes for Hajj. This guy is mutamatti', did not return home to offer two rituals. What about if he leaves Mecca and goes to Taif or to Jeddah or to Medina? Isn't he a traveler? The answer is yes, but he did not travel back home. So he's still considered to be on a journey of Hajj and a traveler. This is different from someone in Dubai performing Umrah and going back to Dubai, and then on the 8th of the Hijjah coming for Hajj. This guy is not mutamatti'. His Umrah does not have any connection to his Hajj. And this is a frequently asked questions. People say, Sheikh, after Eid of Ramadan, I went and performed Umrah and back to Riyadh or to Jeddah, and I did not intend to make Hajj, and now I want to make Hajj. Would I be forced to do tamattu'? The answer is no, because you came back to your home, whether you intended it or not. But a person coming from Mumbai after Ramadan, performing Umrah, not intending to go for Hajj, stayed with his son who works in Jeddah, and just before Hajj, he thought of going for Hajj. He says, I want to do Ifrad, or I want to do Qiran. Said, no, can do. He says, why? He says, because you came from Mumbai and performed Umrah, and you stayed in the holy shrines or around it without going back home. So by default, you are in the state of tamattu'. So you have to perform tamattu'. So this is the biggest difference, and I hope this makes sense to you. Number two, now we're talking about Qiran. A pilgrim choosing the Qiran method starts his Ihram at the point of Miqat, declares Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik, and says the dua. He says on reaching Mecca, he performs the Tawaf and the Sa'i. What Tawaf is this? It's not Umrah. It is Tawaf al-Qudum. And what Sa'i is it? It is Sa'i of Hajj. This person and the one after him, they both have the option to make this Sa'i earlier. Ifrad. He starts his Ihram at the point of Miqat and declares Labbaik Allahumma Labbaik. On reaching Mecca, he performs the Tawaf and the Sa'i, but he neither shaves his head nor releases himself from consecration. He remains in Ihram until he has performed the stoning and the Qiran. Now, remember, going to Mecca, doing Tawaf al-Qudum, then offering Sa'i al-Hajj is an option. If a person doing Qiran or Ifrad doesn't want to go to Mecca, he wants to go straight to Mina, and from there straight to Arafat, no problem. But on the day of Eid onwards, he has to perform Tawaf al-Hajj and Sa'i al-Hajj as well, exactly like al-Mutamatti'. I hope this makes a bit of sense to you nowadays. Now, it says here, the Tawaf of arrival, or Tawaf al-Qudum, is a sunnah for those doing this great duty in either the Ifrad or the Qiran method. Following this Tawaf with Sa'i is a recommended sunnah which our Prophet did, alayhi salatu. One may also delay the Sa'i until he has performed the Tawaf of Ifada or Tawaf al-Hajj, that is after attending Arafat, similarly to the one doing Tamattu' and the one doing Tamattu'. So again, this is an option for the people doing Qiran or ifrad. We have the things to be done afterwards, but this would take us a very, very long time to explain, which I think if we manage to digest what I had given you in the previous 30 minutes, we would be in good hands, inshallah. If I may recommend that you watch this again and take notes and make a diagram with trees and branches, I don't know what they call them, Quran and Ifrad, and then distinguish between Quran and Ifrad separately. That would enhance your knowledge of Hajj. And Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. So we go to the questions, and we don't have plenty of them, but inshallah we will try to make the best of them. So Ramla says, is the hadith authentic that whoever recites La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu, yuhyi wa yumit, wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir 10 times at the end of al-Maghrib, Allah shall send for him protectors to guard him from shaitan. He wipes from him 10 of the destructive evil deeds, and it shall be for him the equal of freeing 10 believing slaves. Ramla, you have mixed apples with oranges, and this happens a lot when people are not careful when they're studying the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The Sunnah has to be studied carefully. Sometimes we tend to neglect the exact wordings, which is not permissible. In the hadith of Al-Bara ibn Azib, may Allah be pleased with him, when the Prophet taught him alayhi salatu wasalam how to go to bed and sleep, so he told him to put his hand under his cheek and to say the supplication, Allahumma inni aslamtu nafsi ilayk wa wajjahtu wajhi ilayk wa alja'tu dhahri ilayk wa fawwadtu amri ilayk raghbatan wa rahbatan ilayk la malja'a wa la manja minka illa ilayk amantu بكتابك الذي أنزلت وبنبيك الذي أرسلت. The last phrase was, I believe in the revelation or in the book that you have revealed and in your prophet that you had sent. So Al-Bara repeated it as he memorized it, but at the end he made a mistake which might seem not a big issue. So instead of saying آمنت بكتابك الذي أنزلت وبنبيك الذي أرسلت, he said وبرسولك الذي أرسلت. So instead of saying I believe in the book that you have revealed and in the prophet that you had sent, he said I believed in the book that you have revealed and in the messenger you had sent. One would say, okay, prophet, messenger, they're the same. The prophet stopped him and he said, nay, say, and in the prophet you had sent. So he told him, ordered him to change the messenger into the prophet, which is the original text. From this hadith, scholars said that it is important to observe the exact wordings of the text of the Prophet ﷺ's hadith, because this is a revelation. It's not something that you may tamper with or take it lightly. It's not the Quran. I can change few words here and there. And it's a long topic of dispute among scholars. So what you have done, Ramla, you've mixed apples with oranges. There are a number of hadiths Some of them are agreed upon, meaning that both Bukhari and Muslim reported. And some of them are authentic but not in Bukhari and Muslim. So the first one is narrated by Abu Ayyub. The Prophet says, alayhi salatu wasalam, whoever says, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa ala kulli shayin, fixed. There isn't any al-hayyul qayyum, like you have mentioned in your narrations, or yuhyi wa yumit wa huwa ala kulli shayin qadir. There isn't yuhyi wa yumit. There is la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. There is no yuhyi wa yumit. No. La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa ala kulli shayin qadir. What is the reward for this? The first hadith of Abu Ayyub is different than the hadith of Abu Hurairah, because Abu Hurairah is the same identical wording. La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa ala kulli shayin qadir. And the hadith and the hadith of Abu Hurairah is also agreed upon. But the reward is different and the numbering is different. Abu Ayyub says that the Prophet said, whoever says this 10 times, then as if he had freed 4 slaves of the descendants of Prophet Ismail. So it's not freeing 10 believing slaves, it's 4, and not from any ethnicity, rather from the descendants, from the offspring of Prophet Ismail, which means that they are very high in quality and price. Hadith of Abu Ayyub, and here in this hadith of Abu Ayyub, we don't have anything. The hadith of Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, whoever says, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa ala kulli shayin qadir, 100 times per day. So again, here it is 100, not 10. Here, the Prophet says, alayhi salatu wasalam, it would be equivalent as if he had freed 10 slaves, not 4, and not from the offspring of Prophet Ismail, any random 10 slaves. Okay, and he will be rewarded 100 good deeds, and he will be, and 100 bad deeds would be erased, and it would be a protection for him from Satan until nightfall. And no one will attain better than what he had attained except someone who does more than what he did. So instead of freeing 100 slaves, he frees 110. So definitely that has more value. The third hadith is of Imam Ahmad, reported in Al-Musnad by Abu Hurairah as well. The Prophet says, alayhi salatu wasalam, whoever says, La ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, lahul mulku wa lahul hamdu wa ala kulli shayin qadir, Allah would give him 100 good deeds, erase 100 bad deeds, and it would be equivalent to 1 slave being freed, and he will be protected with it until it's night time. And if he says it at night time, he'll be protected until it's morning time as well. So now you get a glimpse of how important it is to memorize the different narrations and to know the different rewards so you would anticipate it when you are. Number 2, Fida says how Ihram and Arafat are both rukun and also wajib. The question is not clear, Fida. As for Ihram, to enter in the state of Ihram, this is a pillar. But if you mess around with some of the details of Ihram, such as wearing a shirt, if I say Labbaik Allahumma Umrah, so I enter in the state of Ihram, but I break it by wearing a shirt, expiation. So this is rukun. Without it, I cannot enter the state of ihram. If I just simply take off my clothes, wear the garments, the white garments of ihram, the towels, but I don't intend it, so the pillar is missing and my hajj or umrah is invalid. With Arafat, it's the same, as we will come inshallah to discuss this next Monday. Arafat day is 24 hours, night and day. And if I don't spend a moment in the area of Arafat, my hajj is invalid. But staying in Arafat until the sun sets is wajib, mandatory. So if I manage to stay there 1 minute during the daytime and I leave, my hajj is valid, but I have to pay the expiation for abandoning one of the mandatory acts, which is staying until the sun sets. So maybe this is what confused you. Her second question, at the miqat, well, sad news, you can't. It is totally prohibited for a person who wants to enter in the state of ihram to perfume his clothes. I can perfume my entire body, but not the garments of ihram. So when I take a bath, I can put body lotion, I can apply my deodorants, I can fill my beard with perfume, with oud, my hair, no problem. But the garments that I wear must not have any contact with perfume, whether I burn some, like we call it oud, or I put some which is non-alcoholic usually, and even if it's alcoholic perfumes, there's no problem in that. No, nothing must come in contact with the clothes, because the perfumes I'm wearing on my body would wear off a couple of hours later. But if I put them in my ihram garments, it would stick for a couple of days, maybe more. Afia says, a person vowed that he never wastes water, but he void it when he is not aware of its seriousness, or he vowed it when he was not aware of its seriousness or about the expiation. Does he still have to pay the expiation, or he won't be sinful because he did not know the ruling? The answer is he has to pay the expiation. There is a difference between not knowing the penalty, not knowing that it is a sin to begin with. So if someone says to me, Sheikh, I accepted Islam a few months ago, and it was Ramadan, and I had intercourse with my wife. Wallahi, I did not know that intercourse during the daytime of Ramadan while we are fasting is not permissible. Because all what I remember, people saying that fasting is not to eat and drink. So that this is all what fasting. Go home, live your life. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Another person comes and says, Sheikh, I had intercourse with my wife during the daytime of Ramadan while we were both fasting. By Allah, I did not know that the expiation was to fast 2 consecutive months. I thought that I may feed 10 people or make up for that day and repent. I was ignorant. So what should I do, Sheikh? The answer is go and fast 60 consecutive days. Sheikh, that's a lot. Wallahi, I didn't know that it was this severe. Well, tough bananas, my friend. You don't have to know. the severity of the punishment to be excused. As long as you knew it was sinful, that's it. The expiation must be paid and given. Therefore, the person who vowed not to waste water, if he wasted water, he has to give the expiation of his vow and repent to Allah. Bansi, please, in my part of the world, there are herbalists who tell you to go and plug some leaves or the back of a tree and don't utter a word while doing so. Is this permissible Islamically? I think you did not mean to say plug, because plug is when you insert something into another. You plug in the socket. But you meant to say pluck, which is done with leaves of trees or branches. You pluck them, you extract them, you take them. So if the herbalist told you not to utter a word while doing so, this doesn't make any sense. And most likely, this guy is working with the jinn, or he's a soothsayer, so I recommend that you don't go to him anymore. Afrina says, is this allowed to speak to Allah about the injustice of a father? Afrina, if you mean that you make dua to Allah, there's no problem in that. When you say, oh Allah, you see what my father is doing to me and how abusive he is. Oh Allah, guide him and protect me from his abuse so that I won't have to suffer anymore, etc. There's no problem. Whenever you supplicate to Allah, humiliate yourself to Allah, beg Allah, this is a good deed. Now, what's not permissible is to speak to Allah Azza wa Jal as you're speaking to a friend, as you vent to a friend. Do you believe that, Allah? Do you believe what my father did to me? The other day, he did this and this and this. Is it something that anyone can believe? How is that possible, Allah? Now, this is totally disrespectful. Allah knows everything. Allah sees everything. Allah hears everything. So by venting like this and speaking to Allah as if you're speaking to a friend, then you are disrespecting Allah, and this is not permissible. Afrina says, well, we just done that. Haslin says, is act of ramal recommended for women? Betting is not permissible in Islam, but I think that if we made a crash quiz for each one of you listening who attended last Monday's lesson, probably 90% would not know. What is ramal? I can't hear you because this is one way. No problem. Ramal is to run or to walk in fast strides in the first 3 rounds of Tawaf al-Qudum. And in Sa'i, it is to walk quickly, it's called Sa'i, Harwala, between the 2 green signs. So Haslin says, what's the ruling for women? Are they to do this? Ibn al-Munzir, may Allah have mercy on his soul, said that the consensus of all scholars of Islam that women must not perform ramal nor to hasten in striding or jogging when doing sa'i. So this is the consensus of scholars. So one must avoid this, a woman avoid this so that they would not get lost and he would be with them. So abandoning this sunnah for him becomes recommended as well. Fatima says, is zakat liable on the gold jewelry which are in pawn, in the bank or somewhere else? So Fatima is saying, a sister who has a box of gold jewelry wanted to borrow money. So when she went to a pawn shop or to the bank and pawned them this jewelry and took $1,000 in exchange. The jewelry is far more than that. But as a guarantee that she will bring back the 1,000, and it's interest free. It has to be. Otherwise she would have fallen into riba. So a couple of weeks later, it is her date to give out zakat on her gold. She claims that she does not possess the gold. So does she pay zakat for it? The answer is yes, because she was the one who pawned it. It's still hers. The money is still hers. So she must give zakat for that pawned gold. Haslin says, can we do ruqya even if we do not have illness? The answer is no. Ruqya is done whenever someone has an illness, a disease, black magic, evil eye, envy, or jinn possession. But if you're healthy, you do not do ruqya for protection. There are adhkar in the morning and the evening to be said, which will give you protection with the grace of Allah. Afia says, how should one take weak hadith? Can one follow it or not? Is a person sinful if he follows a weak hadith? This is a big issue of dispute among scholars. And to make it in a nutshell, the most authentic opinion is that Allah has revealed to us and vowed upon himself to protect the religion, whether it's Quran or Sunnah. Therefore, there is no need to refer to weak hadiths, because it's a system. As long as Allah has protected the authentic hadiths, and we know not rely on weak hadith at all. Some scholars say that if it is not talking about halal or haram, or about things in the unseen, or about things in tafsir or fiqh, then there's no problem in doing it, such as when we have a hadith stating that if you pray 2 rak'ahs, Allah will do this for you and do that for you, which is called fada'ilul a'mal, an extra thing, doesn't have anything to do with halal or haram or obligations or prescribed punishment, etc. But I stick with the first opinion, and Allah knows best. Abdul Mu'min Adam says, what is the ruling for those who call his Shaykh Rasulullah? This is blasphemous. That he is the messenger of Allah, this is blasphemous. But it seems to me that there is something fishy going on, and it's not as straightforward as or as blasphemous as it may sound. So I'd highly recommend Abdul Mu'min that you look into it and see whether the man's name is Rasulullah or not. Why is he calling him Rasulullah knowing that there's no messenger after the Prophet ﷺ? Rabia Ahmad says, is it permissible to make a dua in prostration for my siblings, which the dua Prophet Musa, peace be upon him, did for his brother Harun? It goes like Rabbi ghfirli wa li akhi wa adkhilni fi rahmatika wa anta arhamur rahimin. There's no problem in that, inshallah. The dua is for Musa and his brother, but if you do it for your brother and ask Allah to have forgiveness, no problem in that. Tanbeen says, is chartered accountant profession haram? This is problematic because any work riba, and the vast majority of companies either finance their projects with riba loans, interest-based loans, or they deposit their money in banks and they charge interest over that. And who's the one who registers this? The accountant. The Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah cursed those who take riba and give riba. And those two witnesses who witness the transaction and that person who registers it down, who documents it. Therefore, this hadith clearly answers the question. KF Mukta says, I know wishing on birthday is haram, but if I send food or send blessings to anyone, will it be a sin? The answer is yes. The same thing applies. Any form of celebrating, endorsing, congratulating, sending a gift, making food, just baking a cake with candles on them, all of this is prohibited because it's imitating the disbelievers. And finally, Zahara says, I have a question about zakat. If I don't have any savings, all my salary gets spent for the daily expenses, still, am I obligated to pay zakat? The answer is no. If you attended our classes on zakat, you know that we mentioned two conditions. One, that you have an amount of wealth that reaches the threshold or above. Two, that a whole lunar year passes with that wealth in your possession. So if you manage to make hands to mouth and you don't save anything, there's no zakat, none whatsoever on you. This is all the time we have for today. Until we meet you next Monday, I leave you fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.